Things are heating up in Rip City, and the Blazers just traded the AC. Allen Crabbe is headed to the Brooklyn Nets. Welcome to the Blazers Edge podcast. I'm Tara. Today I'm joined by features writer and editor Eric Griffith to dig into this trade and try and figure out what it all means. While his initials AC may be the reason he was called Cool Breeze, it was Crabbe's chill demeanor that really had him living up to the nickname. What I'll remember most about Allen Crabbe is his unflappability. He has the third highest three-point shooting percentage in the franchise, and you could never tell if he was on a hot streak or if he'd just gone cold by the look on his face. He shot above average from virtually all areas outside the arc, but sometimes he could kind of just disappear. But through it all, he was mellow, chill, relaxed, mild-mannered. It was basically impossible to get a rise out of Allen Crabbe. Eric, what are you going to remember most about Allen Crabbe's time with the Trailblazers?
That's a loaded question. I was never a Cool Breeze fan, much to the chagrin of Blazers Edge feature editor Chris Lucia.
Also Joe. She's also a huge Crabbe fan.
You're right. Something about this podcast loves Cool Breeze. I don't get it. I'm going to remember his hair probably because he had one of the more interesting haircuts in recent Blazers history.
I have a theory about Allen Crabbe's hair. I remember after his first year, because like I said, super cool demeanor, just never really stood out. And then suddenly his second year, he came back and he had muscles and new hair. And I honestly think that a large part of that was his effort to be a more imposing presence. And I think it worked in a lot of ways because I think people, he had a much better year, and I don't think it was due to his hair, but I do think that his summertime makeover that turned him into a more imposing figure, I think it did translate into his game.
Well, apparently he should have gotten a makeover again in the summer of 2016.
Well, let's talk about the summer of 2017, the offseason that just keeps on giving. I totally thought it was going to be safe to turn off the notifications on my phone, and I was just getting ready to do that this week when suddenly we heard about this trade. So, Eric, can you go ahead and go over the terms of the trade as far as we know what they are and what happened?
Yeah, I'm totally with you. Complete shock. It came noon on a Tuesday with no rumors whatsoever, and all of a sudden, Allen Crabbe is gone. Wow.
I was at work, and when I heard about it, I looked up from my desk, and I was looking around for anybody that I could see within my sight who could talk about it. And I think I let out a little bit of a gasp, and this guy ran over to my row, and he was like, "Are you okay?" And I'm like, "Do you want to talk about Allen Crabbe?"
Yeah, poor Blazers Edge managing editor Dave Deckard is on vacation this week and is, not hanging out on the Blazers Edge Slack channel at all. And, he chose the 1 week where something actually happened all summer. And so we got to fill in and, do all the fun writing for him, which I was thankful for.
So go ahead and talk about what the terms of the trade were.
Yeah, so the trade was a straight-up 1-for-1, which is not unusual necessarily, but, is not the norm anymore in the NBA. It was Allen Crabbe for Andrew Nicholson.
So Andrew Nicholson, somebody that I had never even really heard of, and we immediately heard that the Trailblazers were probably going to stretch him. So my first question is, to clarify, Allen Crabbe's salary was much higher than Nicholson's salary. Now, I know that there's cases where salaries have to match. How come in this case that was not true?
Yes, Allen Crabbe was around, I think, $19 million, and Nicholson is around $6 million. We're talking in very rough figures. They didn't have to match because Brooklyn is below the salary cap, and so Brooklyn can take back more money in a trade than they send out. The Blazers have to match salaries, but they can take back less than they send out, obviously. The benefit here is since the Blazers took back less than they sent out, they created what's called a trade exception. And so they can now take on a player for up to $13 million, the difference between the Nicholson and Crabbe contracts, for nothing, basically, from another team for up to 1 year if they want to.
If they don't use it by the end of the year, what happens?
So the vast majority of these trade exceptions expire. And so if the Blazers don't use it in 1 year, it will expire. And I would actually kind of bet money that they're not going to use it because it looks like they're trying to get close to or under that luxury tax again. And if they use the trade exception, all of a sudden their luxury tax bill goes way up again.
Teams are allowed to use a portion of the player exception, is that correct?
Yeah, you don't have to use all of it.
So you can use whatever amount of it you want, and then the remainder of it just sits there in the bank until you use it or don't, and then at the end of the year it's gone.
Yep, and you can't combine it with another trade, and so the Blazers can't put together like their trade exception and Evan Turner and take back a $30 million player. They have to use the trade exception separately from any other trades.
Okay, so it has to be not attached to any other trade.
Yep, exactly.
Okay. I thought it was interesting that the Trailblazers were able to get this deal with the Nets because as far as I understand it, a lot of people were courting the Nets because they were one of the teams that had the most room. So do you think it was hard for the Trailblazers to, how did the Trailblazers get this when there was a lot of teams probably wanting to deal with the Nets?
Well, I think the Blazers had a player the Nets wanted. And if you go and read the analysis from the Nets side of things, a lot of Nets fans are very excited about getting Allen Crabbe. Remember, they were the ones who offered him this massive contract last season. And so I think there was kind of essentially a reset button pressed by Neil Olshey where he decided, you know what, I shouldn't have matched that contract based on the way Allen Crabbe played. We're going to go ahead and send him to Brooklyn, who still wants him.
One of the things that really surprised me about this trade is that Allen Crabbe I look at him as a really West Coast guy. Grew up in Southern California, attended Cal. I thought if he was going to get traded, he was going to go somewhere like Sacramento or, somebody on the West Coast. I was really surprised to hear that he was going east.
Well, and apparently he really wants to go to Brooklyn, too, because he had a trade bonus, which a trade bonus is when a player gets traded, they get a percentage of their salary as extra money, basically, as compensation for going to a team they didn't choose. And he waived that. He was going to get an extra $5.5–6 million over the next 2 years for being traded. And he said, you know what? I'll pass on that. I'd rather go to Brooklyn.
There's been a lot of talk about trade clauses because there's some big stars right now who have trade clauses, Melo being like the obvious one. Is that the same kind of trade clause that we're talking about and LeBron also has?
No, we're talking about a trade kicker, which is when a player signs a contract. It basically says if I get traded, I get a certain percentage, up to 15% of my salary over the next however many years as compensation for being traded. The LeBron and Melo thing is straight up a no trade clause where they have to agree to be traded anywhere, and those are pretty rare.
Okay, got it. So Allen Crabbe, it didn't say that he, could say I don't want to be traded. It just said that if we trade you, you're going to get a bonus.
Exactly, and he chose to pass on that bonus to make the trade easier for the Nets.
Yeah, I want to understand a little bit better about who is affected by Crabbe waiving his trade clause. So who normally would pay the bill for a trade clause?
A little bit confusing. You almost need like a flowchart and like a PowerPoint presentation.
Okay, good. It's not just me then.
No. The Blazers would be responsible for Allen Crabbe's trade bonus. And so for each of the next 2 years, the Blazers would pay Allen Crabbe extra money on top of the $19-ish million he's already going to make. I think it was about $3 million each year. But that money would count against the Nets' salary cap.
The Blazers would pay it, but it would be added to the Nets' payroll, basically.
Exactly.
But the Blazers would have paid it for them.
Yes, and it wouldn't count against the Blazer payroll. So like right now the Blazers are like right near the luxury tax. If Allen Crabbe had kept his trade kicker, that would not have affected the Blazers' luxury tax set or luxury tax amount.
When you waive your trade clause, is that in this case it sounds like it helps both teams? Or is it a one-sided deal? It
helps both teams. You usually do it because you need to waive it to make the trade happen and because you want to go to that team. I think I'd have to double check. I think Chris Paul waived his trade clause to go to the Rockets this summer. The reason he did that was because if he didn't do that, then his salary would be too high for the Rockets to take it back in the trade.
Because the Rockets, the team that he's going to, would have been the team against whose payroll it would have.
Yeah, and so they would have had to match salaries for that, and it wouldn't have worked. You know, the salary matching math wouldn't have worked. So Chris Paul said, "I want to go to the Rockets really bad. I'm going to go ahead and waive my trade bonus." or my trade kicker. They're the same thing.
Another thing that you talked about earlier was the stretch provision. So again, AC for Nicholson. Nicholson was waived and stretched. Is that how you say it? Is that the vernacular to
Absolutely,
use?
you nailed it. Absolutely right.
Okay, so how does stretching work? And can I just put in a little plug for people? Everybody should have a friend like Eric who will answer CBA questions at literally any hour of the day. People like you are very handy to have around because as soon as things like this come up, I'm always like, Eric, what's happening? So I think I went to you immediately trying to understand how the stretch provision works. So I just want to put it out there how nice it is to have a friend who's willing and you never complain either.
I think it's fun. I love talking about the contracts. I think they're awesome. If anyone is interested in asking me questions, I'm Eric G_NBA on Twitter. And then also I have articles up on Blazers Edge all the time. So you can jump into the comments and ask me any salary-related question or basketball-related questions you might have. Anyway, the stretch provision. That's what we were talking about, right?
How does that work?
Yes. So Andrew Nicholson had 3 years remaining on his contract, and the 2017-2018 NBA season hasn't started yet. And so what the Blazers apparently did was said, we're going to waive him. He also had about $20 million, actually. I think it was $19.9 million remaining total over the next 3 years on his contract. And so the Blazers have to pay him those $20 million over the next 3 years, usually once they waive him. Instead, the Blazers stretched that. And what that means is they can spread that $20 million out over the next 7 years.
Does it have to be, like, how do you figure out how many years it gets stretched out over?
The number of years is double the remaining years on the contract plus 1.
And it's always that?
It's always that. So if we have any algebra fans in the room, maybe there's a math teacher, it's 2x plus 1, where x is the number of years remaining on the contract. So he had 3 years left on his contract, so you double 3, which is 6. And then you add 1 more year, which is 7. Then you take that remaining $19.9 million guaranteed dollars and spread it out over those years, and the Blazers will be paying him $2.84 million until 2024.
That is a long ways out. And he is not the only person who the Blazers have stretched. So as I recall, former Blazer great Anderson Varejao is somebody who we stretched, as well as Festus Ezeli. We stretched him out. So we have 3 front court guys on our all stretched team. We just need to add a couple of back court guys, and we have a starting 5 of the stretched team. So how much does that, what's our bill in just stretched contracts per year? What's the Trailblazers bill now?
It is right now about $5 million. If I'm doing the math right, about $5 million.
At least for the next couple of years.
Yep.
And then
for the next 3 years. And then Ezeli falls off, and then Varejao falls off, and then eventually Nicholson falls off.
So, obviously it makes it so you don't have to take the hit so hard if you stretch somebody. Other advantages why you would want to stretch somebody instead of just like biting the bullet and paying it off?
There really isn't one. In my opinion, this is a mistake by the Blazers. They're clearly doing this because they're worried about the luxury tax. And the downside to this is that now they've handicapped themselves by $2.84 million out of their salary cap for the next 7 years. I guarantee you at some point in the next 7 years, they will have salary cap room. And they're essentially saying, we're going to have $2.84 million less in salary than every single other team in the NBA to sign free agents. They're already at a disadvantage signing free agents, and now they're just making it that much worse because they have that much less money than every other team.
To argue with that, yeah, we're already at a disadvantage for free agents. So why go all in to try to get free agents that way? What if they were stretching it to make sure that they had room to sign another player?
That probably is what it is. They're stretching in because they're stretching all of these guys because they're worried about the luxury tax payment, and they want to make sure they have room to sign or they want to minimize the impact that Nurkic and Vonleh have in the long term on the team's bottom line. My response to that would be, well, then you need to go back and think about that last summer before you signed all these massive contracts. If you were going to be worried about pinching $2 million in salary per year for the next 3 years to pay Nicholson that much less, then you shouldn't have signed freaking Evan Turner to begin with.
Okay, well, you can't go back in time. They can only go forward. So do you think this made things worse?
I think it made things worse. I think they should have bit the bullet and accepted they were going to have to pay a certain amount in luxury tax over the next 3 years because Nicholson's for $19 million, and then preserved that long-term flexibility. Because a worst case scenario is it's 2021 or whatever, and they want to sign a role player to back up Damian Lillard to put the team over the edge, and they're a couple $1 million short. The Lakers have 14 million to do it, and the Blazers only have 12 million, and the Blazers can't sign that guy now.
Let's see. My next question just flew out of my head because you really perked up on that one.
Trying to make your podcast exciting.
Bring in the heat, Eric. I have a theory though, and you probably can argue this. Happy to argue this one with me. That I don't think general managers make mistakes so much as they take big gambles that fail. Like, I just have a hard time believing that somebody gets to the position that they're in right now and they just like bumble something. There's a few franchises who I may think that out of, but I think a lot of times instead of thinking, I look at it less like somebody made a mistake and more like they took a big gamble and then that gamble failed.
Yeah, they were clearly gambling on all of these guys to overachieve. Myers Leonard, Evan Turner, Allen Crabbe, all of them to overachieve when they signed them last summer. None of them did. And as a consequence, those salaries look real bad right now. There's also a certain amount of job preservation. Neil O'Shea, in reality, probably won't be with the Blazers in 7 years. How many GMs last 12 years or whatever? And so to him, worrying about the Blazers' salary cap space in 2022 might be less important than keeping Paul Allen happy by saving $8 million or whatever in luxury tax payments next year.
Well, I'm really curious to see what the other shoe that's going to drop is on this one, because I think everybody has been waiting for the Blazers to do something. So, were you like happy just to know that they did something, or would you have been, thought it would have been smarter to just hold on?
I think this is kind of I think other than the salary cap implications I complained about a minute ago, I think this is more or less a net neutral move. It's a good thing because now it's easier for them to sign Nurkic. It's a bad thing because, they're losing Allen Crabbe's three-point shooting, which is going to be a big hole for this team. I'm not an Allen Crabbe fan, but that three-point shooting is disproportionately valuable for the Blazers because they have so few shooters. So I was pleased on the one hand they made a move that makes it more likely that Nurkic can easily be re-signed. I was displeased that they lost the outside shooting.
Okay, so be honest. Had you heard about Andrew Nicholson before this trade happened?
Yeah, because all the Nets fans, he's kind of their version of Myers Leonard. Nobody really liked him or wanted him on the team anymore.
Okay, that's your version of Myers Leonard. There are some of us who still believe that Myers Leonard...
That is not my version. I said that was the Nets fans' opinion. I think we can...
Okay.
I think we can acknowledge that there's a large number of Blazers fans who are not Myers Leonard fans at the moment.
Okay, that's a whole nother podcast. We're not going to go into that.
That's probably for the best.
We're going to keep this short. So the timing of this trade, to get back on track, the timing of this trade, it's not one of those things that happened right after the trade deadline. Why the delay? Were there any reasons for the delay?
It's impossible to say without being in the room with Neil O'Shea, who, having a Jim Carrey liar situation. I don't think we'll ever know.
Weren't there restrictions based on when Crabbe signed the offer sheet last year?
Those were raised. They couldn't trade him to the Nets until July 9th. I mean, we're sitting here, it's July 24th or 25th or whatever. So I think 26th today. Wow. So I think it's a matter of just, it took this long to negotiate. The other possibility is that the Blazers were pursuing other moves. We heard all these rumors about trying to facilitate the Carmelo Anthony deal. And the longer it goes without us hearing any more rumors about that, the more it looks like maybe the new Knicks management might have put the kibosh on that trade for now. And so maybe this was plan B after a Carmelo trade fell through. Maybe they were trying to trade Evan Turner first and they couldn't find any takers for Evan Turner, so they switched gears to trading Allen Crabbe. It's really impossible to know without Neil O'Shea without Neil O'Shea being totally honest in an interview.
This came shortly after the Blazers decided to extend the time for their decision about Pat Connaughton. Do you think any of those are related? Because Pat Connaughton, he was supposed to, July 25th was the date at which I can't remember what the technical thing that Blazers could pick up his third year.
His contract was non-guaranteed for the upcoming season. It was set to become fully guaranteed on July 25th. The team renegotiated with him to, I think, August 31st to make that decision. That's important because right now they can cut Pat Connaughton and it won't affect their salary cap for next season. Once his contract becomes guaranteed, then when they cut him, they still have to pay him. It's pretty strangely coincidental they make that trade and then also make that decision on like basically the same day. I don't know if they're related or not though, because it could just be that the negotiations lined up with that mandatory deadline for making the Pat Connaughton decision.
It looks to me like they're doing what they often do, which is to have two avenues. So they're trying to leave as many avenues open, in case something else comes up, they can decide to not pick up Pat Connaughton. Or if nothing comes up, nothing comes to fruition, they can go ahead and move forward with him. Would that be correct? Is that what you could do in that situation? Like if nothing comes up, they could go ahead and pick up Pat Connaughton and move into the season and be ready to go?
Yeah, but I'm then confused why they would stretch Andrew Nicholson and not wait, because they have until August 31st to make that decision too.
Well, I mean, if they're waiting to figure out if they can get this complicated deal and they want to leave as much room for themselves as possible, if somebody comes over who's worth that exact, what is it, 12.9 or whatever it is, or somebody's a little bit more than that and they need to use the money that they have promised to Pat Connaughton, they're leaving themselves as open as possible.
Yeah, it's not bad to delay those decisions if you can. I'm all for it.
What avenues does this additional open up for additional moves this offseason? Like immediately as soon as Crabbe was traded, all kinds of, Twitter was abuzz with possibilities of players who may come to Portland. What are some of the ones that you think are most interesting or intriguing or possible that you've seen?
I think they need to find a shooter right now. So I'm a little skeptical they're going to use that trade exception to bring in a player, or that they're going to use their taxpayer mid-level exception, because it looks like they're trying as hard as they can to cut tax payments. And so if they add someone else now, it's going to raise the luxury tax again, which would go against the entire point of this Allen Crabbe trade, apparently. So I'm a little skeptical that they're looking to add anyone really at this point.
Some people have been talking about adding Ryan Anderson, going back to the rumors from earlier this summer that the Melo trade was going to end up with Ryan Anderson in Portland. Does that become any easier with this move?
I don't know if it becomes easier, but all of a sudden it makes a little bit more sense. They are now have less salary obligations, so they could theoretically replace the salary obligation with Ryan Anderson. He's also a great shooter, so they could use a great shooter at this point as well. So the Ryan Anderson, I still don't think it makes the most sense for the team, but all of a sudden it makes more sense than it did a week ago.
Because instead of having three outsized contracts in Turner, Crabbe, and Anderson, they would only have two in Turner and Anderson.
And they need outside shooting more now. Really CJ and Dane were the only two who can knock down a three reliably. And so adding Anderson all of a sudden becomes more valuable than it would have been if he was joining a team that had Crabbe and a third shooter.
Do you think that the move to send Crabbe away signals anything else about the basketball? I mean, I'm just totally spitballing here. I just had this idea and it probably doesn't make any sense. But maybe with having the stronger presence of Nurkic, they're realizing that maybe having a stronger interior game is the way they want to go. Or do you think it's too soon for us to even know what they want to do?
I think it's more a sign they decided that Allen Crabbe was never going to live up to this contract. He was basically signed on a prospective contract. He wasn't worth nearly $20 million a year when they signed him to this deal, and the hope was that he would live up to it. I think you'll have a hard time finding anyone who thought he did live up to it this year, and so I think it's more a sign that they decided that the chances of him living up to that deal in Portland were pretty low, and so it was time to move on from the Allen Crabbe experiment. That being said, I have a feeling he's going to look pretty good in Brooklyn next year. I think he'll be a little motivated to prove himself, and we might see some of that potential that Portland fans missed out on.
I can't even remember who is in Brooklyn anymore. There has been so much trade from all parts of the NBA except for basically the Trailblazers. I don't even know who's on these teams anymore. Can you remember? Because Brook Lopez is not there anymore, correct? He's been.
Yep, they got D'Angelo Russell and Jeremy Lin are the two guys that are going to stand out to most people on the Brooklyn Nets.
Okay, who do they have in the middle as his center?
I can't remember off the top of my head. I know they have Rondé Hollis Jefferson. They were playing Trevor Booker a bit.
Almost Portland great.
Almost
Rondé
Portland
Hollis
great.
Jefferson.
Exactly. They got Timothy Mozgov in for
they
taking
got Timothy. Okay.
For taking on they took on two burdensome contracts this summer, huh?
Well, they were everybody's best friend because they had the most space. That's what I'm saying. It's like everybody was courting the Nets because anybody who was over the cap, who was looking to unload, wanted to court the Nets. And I think you're right. You know, we knew the Trailblazers knew that they were already interested in Crabbe. So we had the Trailblazers had a little bit of an advantage there because they already knew that the Nets were interested. But as far as I can understand from some of the reading I've done, you know, the Nets were, you know, very popular this summer because they had so much room to take on contracts.
Definitely.
Let's see. Is there anything else we want to talk about this trade, or should we just go back to waiting and finding out what is going to happen next?
Well, what do you think of it? We never heard from the host on this trade.
Well, like I said, I was just excited that something is going to happen. I really do think that there's likely to be another move, and I believe it's going to be something that nobody saw coming because that's just how things usually go.
Mm-hmm.
I think that they did need to find something to do with one of their really large contracts, and my guess would be if they bring in somebody, it'll be somebody with not much time left. So it'll just be like a 1-year rental of somebody to hopefully try to help the team gel. I would love it if they wanted to bring in some kind of a veteran who could impart a little of that crusty old guy wisdom that we just are lacking on this team simply by the fact that we don't have anybody who's played more than like 5 years in the league, basically.
I think that's a really good point. Last year, especially early in this, I remember they were 13-21 or whatever and lost 11 out of 13 games, and things looked really dismal for about half of last season. And a lot of times it looked like they were just not motivated and lost on the court, to be honest. And I was wondering a lot if they were missing veteran leadership. So I'm with you on maybe getting that vet who, you know, has been there before and maybe has a Chris Kaman or Gerald Henderson type of influence on these young guys.
I don't know what to call it because I don't think it's exactly veteran leadership because I think Damian has that all sewed up. I think he's got the leadership part of it figured out, but the veteran experience is really, I mean, I'm like a broken record on this. I want somebody sitting next to Noah Vonleh on the bench saying, do you see what he just did to you there? He's been doing that to me for 10 years. Here's how you get him back. I want somebody who's like in the ear of our younger guys telling them exactly what these other cagey old guys are doing to them and how to react to it and how to get the best of them. So I would like to see, I think this opens up the possibility that we could get somebody in to be there for a year to, you know, teach them all those old tricks and then be able to, you know, not start again, but able to have room next year. Like, okay, thank you for your service. That was awesome. It was super helpful. Now we need that money to re-sign Nurkic and Vonleh.
Yeah, and this is a deciding year this is the decision year for Vonleh. So finding someone who could help him develop or help the team make a decision on him is going to be crucial.
Yeah, but I'm just excited when something happens. I mean, last year I was really wowed by the continuity factor that the Blazers had going in. Like we had a roster that had like I don't know if it was the most, but it was one of the highest in continuity amongst all the rosters. And I was like, sweet, our guys have been playing together. They know each other really well. Everybody else is just trying to figure things out. And I think I was lulled in by that. I think I was wrong that continuity isn't always the best thing. Sometimes when you introduce a lot of new elements, it makes everybody pay that much closer attention. It makes people fight harder. I think a lot of the teams this year that have had a lot of turnover are going to outperform their expectations, just like we did when we had that massive turn, or like the Trailblazers did when they had that massive turnover. So I'm excited that there's been so much going on this offseason that it's like going on and on and on. I'm just dreading when all the deals are done and there's just nothing.
I'm excited for the games to start. October 17th is circled on my calendar. I can't wait
I'm
to
so
see.
excited about the early start.
Yes. I'm excited there will be fewer back-to-backs. I really don't like the back-to-back games.
I don't know though. I don't like games I don't like it when there's like 2 nights in between games. But I know that's better for the players, so I'll get over it.
It gives you can watch more teams that way. Look at it that way, because then there's fewer games on, so you can catch different teams you wouldn't normally watch more often.
You want to tell? Let's see. You already told everybody where to find you, right? Why don't you tell them one more time?
Yep, EricG_NBA on Twitter. I write under the name Eric Griffith on Blazers Edge. I think I'm in the front page slot 1 right now if you're interested in reading more details on the Crabbe trade. Otherwise, I write a weekly article for Blazers Edge.
Awesome. Thanks, Eric. Thank you so much for joining me tonight, and we will see what happens next.
Yay.